Alright, so, full disclosure, I'm a lazy piece of shit. This video was supposed to come out about 3 months ago, but due to various technical difficulties and my own procrastination, we're doing this now. So, grab a seat, get some popcorn, you're going to be here for a few minutes. So, you see that? That is James McAvoy in the 2008 film Wanted, a movie that you've either seen or you know the most popular thing about it, which in this case would be the bullet curve, right? But what you might not have known was that this movie is based off a comic book from 2003 to 2004 limited series by one Mark Millar, and guess what? It's fucking terrible. So initially what I was planning on doing with this video was do a comparison between the comic and the movie, but they're both so different that it would take me literal hours to go through everything that's different in the comic and the movie. But what's weird about this adaptation is that they're both very similar in many cases. The plot isn't, but a lot of the characters share same names, some character traits. One character from the movie is two characters from the comic combined, and it's just a fucking mess. So, instead I've decided that I'm going to do small character breakdowns, list a few differences here and there, basic shit like that, right? Cool. So, starting off with our main character. In the movie, Wesley Gibson is played by the very handsome James McAvoy. But in the comic book, he, for some reason, looks like Eminem. It's so weird. But Wesley Gibson in the movie is a loser. He's also a loser in the comic, but it's weird how it's done. In the comic and the movie, both Wesleys pretty much start off on the same point in their life. They're not happy with it. They want to be part of something bigger, and eventually they realize that they are. In the movie, this happens when Wesley goes to a gas station. He runs into Fox, and she tries to recruit him into the fraternity because his father is there, and he's going to try to recruit him or save him from the fraternity. It gets explained later. In the comic, this happens whenever he goes to his favorite coffee shop, and Fox just fucking shoots everybody in the coffee shop. And that comes to the first big key difference between the comic and the movie. While the movie deals with assassins and fate and identity, the comic is about supervillains that took over the world and are now running a secret society of other supervillains who have to take over the world in secret, because if they make too much noise or cause too much attention to the universe, superheroes from another universe will come and set everything back to normal. It's actually a pretty interesting concept that the comic never really delves too deeply into. It's more of like a backdrop to just explain why Wesley's able to do whatever he wants. Which, speaking of which, Wesley being able to do whatever he wants, he learns that he's a part of the fraternity and immediately starts doing the most heinous, devious shit anybody can do in any form of fiction, or in real life actually. It's wild. Very early on, there's a panel where he is holding a toaster over a supermodel's bathtub, and he basically says he sexually assaults her. I guess the point of this is just to show that power changed him so much that he just became super evil. For various reasons, the movie doesn't do anything like this, mainly because it wouldn't fly to a general audience. But also, it's not really clear how much influence that they have in the movie. They can pretty much do whatever they want, just not fucking murder anybody and everybody that they come across. Previously mentioned, there's a character called Fox, who in the movie is his hot anime waifu played by Angelina Jolie. In the movie, she actually seems to somewhat fall for him. Kind of, not really. I mean, she kind of sacrificed herself for him at the end, but whatever. But in the comic, because the comic book is more about supervillains and it's more of like a look into, it's more of a deconstruction of this concept of what if supervillains took over a superhero world. She's more or less a Catwoman ripoff that he just fucks a lot in the comic. It's a thing that happens. Good character model though. Moving on to another character that's shared between the comic and the movie, Sloan. Sloan is actually two characters in the comics. The first character he would be is called the Professor. The Professor in the comic is Wesley's mentor character. He kind of tells him what happens in the world, what he's able to do. He explains the concept of superpowers and villains and all that other shit. In the movie, it's Morgan Freeman, and he basically just says, hey, you're able to shoot around corners and slow time with your mind. A lot of cool shit, right? The second character he is in the comics is a character named Mr. Richtus, who does this big hostile takeover of the fraternity towards the end. Basically, he wants to wipe out all of the professor's good guys, they're fucking evil. He wants to wipe out everybody who works for the professor because they live by the code that the fraternity needs to stay in the shadows and not make a big fuss. They've simplified this in the movie and just made Morgan Freeman both of these characters. He teaches Wesley how to be an assassin, and then towards the end it's revealed that he's been betraying the fraternity. So Wesley just decides to go and kill him because, big twist, the last character who's actually shared between the film and the comic is Wesley's father. Wesley's father, in the comic, his supervillain name was the Killer. Essentially, his superpower is if you give him a gun, he can kill people. That's another thing I haven't mentioned yet. Characters have superpowers in the comic. Wesley doesn't really have superpowers. Basically, Wesley from the movie is Wesley from the comic as far as his abilities and the things he can do. Obviously, being a comic book, there's like different types of technology. Like at one point, I think he wears hover boots or some shit. A lot of weird stuff. Now I think it's time to get into the main idea of the comic and the movie. So, the comic shows how a sudden shift in power and status can change a person. The film kind of deals with this, but Wesley doesn't really do anything too wild in the film to where it's nothing too bad. Like, he doesn't go out on the street and murder people. He doesn't just rape random women like he does in the comic. That happens. It's just, he really just does whatever the fraternity tells him, and he just gains confidence. The film really deals more with identity. The entire film is basically wrapped around Wesley wanting to know who he is, and then once the fraternity lies to him and he figures this out, he decides to go and kill them. The whole final fight is a lot different in the comic and the film, like most things I've already mentioned. In the comic, he's attacked by a character named... Listen to this. He's attacked by a character named Shithead, who, if I remember correctly, he's made up of 666 of the world's most evil men's shit, and it's like a living being, and he kills him, and then he goes to go and find the fraternity, and just him and Fox go and just murder all of the evil fraternity members, which is really fun. He never really struggles in the comic book. He literally just says he's gonna go kill somebody and then goes to kill that person. In the movie, which is actually where this image is taken from, after finding out that his father was alive and basically being tricked into killing him, he decides to go after the fraternity, and it's a lot more brutal. He actually struggles. He gets shot a couple times in this. It's not just like him running through a gang of people, so that's always fun. The plot is similar. For example, like the first 4 pages, I think, are basically lifted directly from the comic, and they're adapted into the movie. Also, the shoot the wings off the fly scene from the movie, where Morgan Freeman's character, Sloan, gives him a pistol and tells him to literally just shoot flies, but only the wings. That's lifted from the comic, which is one of my favorite scenes in both iterations of this story. The bullet curve, you know, the famous thing where he fucking whips the bullet around Angelina Jolie's head, that's actually not in the comic. The closest thing you get to that is the final person he kills in the comic, which is the main villain, Mr. Richtus. Mr. Richtus has a gun on him, and Wesley has 2 knives on his back. So he's like, I'll give you 1 shot. And Mr. Richtus tries to shoot him, and Wesley takes the fucking knife from his back and like ricochets the bullet back to Mr. Richtus's throat. That's pretty cool. Another key difference is the twist at the end with his dad. So his dad ends up being alive in the comic book, and he takes him to a grave to go see his mom, I think. And he basically, the entire last issue of the comic is basically just Wesley's origin story, his backstory, because we don't get it throughout the comic book. He's kind of just an asshole the entire time, and it's like, I used to be a loser, but now I'm not. He. It's not that compelling, which honestly, that's kind of the story of the whole comic book. It's not super compelling. Wesley never really tries to do anything outside of being a dick. Right before the final battle, him and Fox are in the bed, and he's basically talking about how he doesn't want to be an asshole, and Fox is like, yeah, that's not really what you're supposed to do. You kind of just went outside and murdered a bunch of people every night. And he's like, oh, so I can actually not be a bad person. And it's only just so at the very end of the comic book you can root for him instead of the people who are taking over the world. It's not that compelling. Whereas in the movie, you're kind of behind Wesley the entire time, because all he's doing is killing people that the Loom of Fate tells him to, which are usually bad people. Speaking of which, the Loom of Fate in the movie is very heavily criticized. It's a movie where people curve bullets based on how they flick their wrist when they pull the trigger of a gun. It's not that serious. But I will say the movie does have a much more cliche plot compared to the fucking comic. But the thing is that it's all an execution, and the comic doesn't execute anything. It kind of feels like it's supposed to be a comedy, but the issue with that is it's not that funny. Like, there's probably one single scene that I've laughed at whenever I read the comic. It's during the meeting between fraternity members, and Wesley's there, and he goes, Mr. Richtus is walking past him, and Mr. Richtus basically just told the entire fucking board of fraternity elders, or whatever they're called, that he wants to take over the world and stop hiding in the shadows. That's kind of like the whole main reason why the antagonist wants to fight him. And Wesley whispers, "Goat fucker," or something like that. And Mr. Richtus looks at him, he overhears him say that, and he's like, "I don't fuck goats, Mr. Gibson. I make love to them." That's the funniest shit in the fucking comic book. And it's honestly the only funny thing in the comic book. Yeah, this comic is just like weirdly edgy, which isn't... I'm not offended by the edginess, but it's edgy for no reason. It doesn't really advance the plot. Characters are just racist and homophobic and all this other shit for no reason. Which it'd be fine if it was funny, but it's just like he'll just occasionally use the F slur on somebody, and it's like, cool. That's cool that you said that. Another thing with the comic is that there isn't really like much action in it. It's basically just them explaining the concept of the supervillains taking over the world, Wesley going on killing sprees, and occasionally there'll be something interesting that happens, but mainly the only real action you get is the final fight, whereas in the movie, every 5 minutes he's curving a bullet around a corner or fucking doing flips, or there's like a cool slow-mo shot. I also haven't really talked about my feelings on the movie. I feel like it's one of those movies that gets a lot of hate because of the time period it came out in. 2008 wasn't really a great year for action films, but personally I think this movie's kind of special. I mean, the editing is a little bit frantic, and the story isn't too deep, but I think the performances from Angelina Jolie, James McAvoy, and Morgan Freeman really elevate it to not being absolute dog shit. And also some of the action scenes are very entertaining, right? I can't say that good stuff from the comic. It's not that good. But yeah, that's pretty much it, I think, on this. I wanted to do more of a discussion piece rather than like a full-on compare contrast. see how this goes. If you guys want to see me do more of a more in-depth look into these topics, let your boy know. It has been your boy Darian. Follow me on Instagram and also subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Marvelous. I'm gonna start posting shit on there, I guess, eventually. Starting with my sex tape. So be on the lookout for that. And with that out of the way, see you guys later. Mwah.